In Brussels, what was expected to be a routine diplomatic appearance quickly became something much more revealing. The cameras were already rolling. The room was quiet. Reporters were waiting for the usual language of international politics. Careful words, polite answers, prepared statements. But what followed was not the kind of moment that disappears into the next news cycle. It was the kind of moment people replay, not because it was loud, but because it was controlled. At the center of it was Mark Carney, calm, measured, almost unreadable. He did not walk into the conversation like a man searching for attention. He walked into it like a man who already knew the pressure was coming. And in modern politics, that matters. Because the most dangerous moments for a leader are not always the speeches made on big stages. They are the unscripted moments. The follow-up question, the uncomfortable silence. The journalist who asks the question, everyone else is thinking, but no one wants to answer directly. That was the atmosphere in the room, tense, formal, and carefully watched. Europe was listening. Canada was listening. And beyond the room, allies and rivals were watching for one thing, a signal. Not just what Carney would say, but how he would say it. Because in diplomacy, tone can be as important as policy. A pause can be as powerful as a paragraph. And a short answer, delivered at the right moment, can say more than an entire press release. The first question came with pressure built into it. It was not simply asking for clarification. It was testing the boundary, testing whether Canada was still moving cautiously, testing whether Carney would speak like a technocrat or like a prime minister prepared to draw a line. For a moment, he listened. He did not interrupt. He did not smile it away. He did not reach for a dramatic response. He allowed the question to sit in the room. That alone changed the tone. Then he leaned forward slightly. His expression stayed calm. His voice remained steady. And he began to answer, not with anger, not with slogans, not with the kind of emotional language that makes headlines for a day and creates problems for a month. He answered like someone choosing every word carefully. He spoke about responsibility, about partnership, about the need for serious countries to act seriously in a world that no longer rewards hesitation. And that was the first shift, because the question had been framed as a challenge. But Carney answered it as a matter of national direction. He was not asking for permission. He was explaining a position. That difference is subtle. But in politics, subtle differences can change the entire meaning of a moment. A weaker answer would have sounded defensive. A louder answer would have sounded emotional. But his answer did neither. It stayed controlled. And that control became the message. Then came the next question, sharper, more direct, the kind of question designed to force a headline. Was Canada choosing Europe over America? Was this a new alignment? Was this a signal that old relationships could no longer be trusted? The room seemed to tighten. These are the questions leaders usually avoid, because any answer can be interpreted as a fracture. Say too much, and you create a diplomatic problem. Say too little, and you appear weak. But Carney did not retreat into empty language. He did something more effective. He reframed the choice. He made it clear that the issue was not about replacing one partner with another. It was about recognizing the world as it is, not as people wish it still were. That was the second shift, and it mattered, because much of modern politics is trapped between nostalgia and reality. Countries speak about old alliances, old certainties, old guarantees. But the world has changed. Trade has changed. Security has changed. Technology has changed. And voters, markets, and governments all know it. Carney's answer carried that message without needing to overstate it. He did not announce a revolution. He did not declare a rupture. He simply made it clear that Canada would not stand still while the global order moved around it. And then came the moment that people noticed. A reporter pressed again. This time, the question was less about policy and more about power. Would Canada follow? Would Canada wait? Would Canada let larger players define the future? It was the kind of question that invites a long answer. But Carney did not give one. He paused, just long enough for the room to feel it. Then he answered with the kind of restraint that makes a sentence land harder. He made it clear that Canada was not there to perform uncertainty. Canada was there to make choices. And the phrase was short. Firm. Almost too simple. But that was why it worked. Because in that moment, the room did not need more explanation. It needed clarity. And clarity is rare in politics. Most political language is built to avoid risk, creates distance. It softens conflict. It leaves every door slightly open. But leadership, at certain moments, requires the opposite. It requires compression, a complex position reduced to a sentence that people can understand, a national strategy expressed in a tone that does not shake. That is what made the exchange powerful. Not because Carney humiliated anyone, not because the room erupted, not because there was a dramatic confrontation, but because he refused to be pulled into panic. He refused to answer from emotion. He refused to make the moment bigger than it needed to be. And by doing that, he made himself look bigger than the moment. That is one of the oldest rules of political communication. The person who controls the temperature controls the room. If the room becomes emotional and you remain steady, people notice. If the question becomes aggressive and you remain precise, people notice. If the pressure rises and your voice does not, people notice. And in Brussels, that was exactly what happened. The power of the moment was not in volume. It was in discipline. Carney's body language said as much as his words. He sat upright. He looked directly ahead. He used his hands only when necessary. There was no excessive movement, no performance of outrage, no attempt to manufacture drama. Instead, he let the pressure build around him while he stayed centered. That kind of presence is difficult to fake, because viewers can sense when someone is trying too hard. They can sense when a leader is performing confidence instead of possessing it. But here, the confidence came from restraint, and restraint in a political room can feel stronger than aggression. By the end of the exchange, the mood had changed. The questions had not disappeared. The disagreements had not vanished. But the frame had shifted. Carney was no longer simply responding to the room. He was setting the terms of the conversation. That is why the clip traveled, because people are not only watching politics for information anymore. They are watching for moments of authority, moments when a leader seems to define the situation instead of being defined by it. And this was one of those moments. A quiet room, a direct question, a controlled answer, a pause, a look, a sentence that did not need to be shouted. In a world full of noise, that kind of calm can feel almost disruptive. Perhaps that is the real lesson from Brussels. Power does not always announce itself with force. Sometimes it appears as stillness. Sometimes it sounds like a steady voice. Sometimes it is the refusal to be rushed, cornered, or provoked. And sometimes, in politics, the strongest message is not the longest one. It is the one that leaves the room with nothing immediate to say.